The boy's name is Charlie. Father died early. His mother remarried. Although he was admitted to the Noble College with excellent grades, but he didn't fit in with the campus. While the rest of the class was having fun, Charlie is trying to earn money for his trip home for Christmas. He takes a job as a caretaker for Frank, a veteran. The pay was as much as $100 a day. Charlie is overjoyed, but the owner tells him this is not an easy job. There were many special requirements. The most important requirement was that he could not call Chief Frank. Charlie took note of all the prohibitions, but as soon as he entered the door, he made the mistake of not calling him sir. Almost couldn't even enter the door. He had to explain. Frank told Charlie to go inside. Charlie faltered and walked up to the door. He saw Frank sitting in the darkest part of the room. Frank was acting strangely, always talking to himself in a commanding tone. If Charlie dared to say one more word, he would cuss mercilessly, or he would make him do 40 push-ups. Finally, Charlie was kicked out of the cabin. Charlie went to the man's family and said he had failed the interview. The family said there was no failure because Charlie was the only one who came to the interview from the beginning to the end. Frank's family told Charlie Frank was an army hero who had been discharged due to injury, probably couldn't accept the reality and was a little hard to approach. Now they needed to go away for a few days. They wanted Charlie to help take care of Frank, and Charlie's kindness made him not refuse. At night, Charlie and his classmate Fatty were on their way back to the dormitory. When they ran into some guys tampering with the lights. They were going to take revenge on the school principal. The next day, the principal was covered in paint from the prank. The principal was so angry that he found out that the day before Charlie and Fatty passed by, he threatened to expel them if they didn't tell the truth. They had time to think about it. Only 1 week before the school assembly, the bullying principal knew Fatty, with his background, was not afraid of expulsion. He told Charlie privately that if he told the truth, he would be guaranteed a place at Harvard. It was Charlie's only chance to change his life. He told him to think about it before the conference. Charlie was torn, but he chose to cover up the truth for his friends, and Fatty made a pact with him not to tell anyone, because he was convinced that it was a shameful thing to report a friend. Charlie came to Frank's house. This time Frank didn't give Charlie a hard time. Instead, he said he was going to New York. He asked Charlie to be his guide dog. The timid Charlie thought it was inappropriate, but he was dragged along by the strong Frank. Charlie was excited to fly for the first time and looked around. The flight attendant brought him a drink. Frank said thank you, Daphne. Charlie was surprised and said how do you know her name is Daphne? Frank said she was wearing an English perfume. Another California accent. A Californian chick who wanted to be a British lady. She must have liked to be called Daphne. Frank had a very sensitive nose. If he was within 5 meters, he could smell the exact perfume a woman was wearing. The two of them arrive in New York. They checked into the most luxurious 5-star hotel in New York. Charlie used to want to live a high-class life, but at the moment, he had no desire to enjoy it. Frank sensed something was wrong with Charlie. He asked Charlie to tell him what was going on. Charlie told Frank what was on his mind. Frank said it was better to tell. There's no need to put your life on hold. You don't have to put your life on hold just because of someone else's fault. The two of them come to the restaurant for a lavish meal. With the help of the wine, Frank told me the real reason why he came to New York. Frank had spent his life savings. He was planning a trip to the end of his life. This blind man accomplished in a few days all the dreams of a man's life. Dancing with beautiful women in the most exclusive restaurants, drinking champagne in the most luxurious hotels, driving down the street in a Ferrari. He said goodbye to his brother, and then he ends his life with no regrets. After hearing Frank's plan, Charlie asked anxiously if it was a joke. Frank didn't give an answer. The next day was Thanksgiving. Frank was dressed up and ready to go see his brother, and Charlie's mind was still on school. He called Fatty to ask him about that. Fatty still told Charlie not to rush. And then he hung up. Frank overheard Charlie's conversation. He asked Charlie what Fatty's family did for a living. Charlie told him Fatty's councilman father is a donor to the school, but Fatty said he would never ask his father for help in this matter. Frank sneered and said Fatty was the son of a powerful man. He wouldn't be punished for anything, and Charlie would be the only scapegoat. If you don't want to be expelled, tell the principal the truth. Charlie doesn't see it that way. He told Frank that I could not be a student at a prestigious school, but I can't be a snitch. Frank laughed and didn't say anything. Then they went to Frank's older brother's house. It wasn't what Frank said it was, a warm welcome. On the contrary, they didn't seem very welcoming to Frank. During the meal, Frank's old habits came back to haunt him. He started bragging about his life. about how Frank had had a great life. He was an adjutant to General Patton, a 4-star U.S. general, witnessed the swearing-in of President Johnson. He was a witness to history. He talked for hours. He advised his nephew to take care of his wife, but maybe the language wasn't very good. The nephew just couldn't help himself. He asked Frank why he didn't say that because of his own foul mouth. He was delaying the appointment of a general. He even drank and played with bombs in the classroom. He blew up a colonel and blinded himself. Frank didn't show any emotion, as if there was something else going on. But his nephew, who thought he had a point, continued to speak out. He repeatedly ignored Frank's warnings, calling Charlie a cha-cha. He was beaten directly by Frank. Frank didn't refute the bomb incident. Instead, he said that Charlie's name was Charlie, not cha-cha. In the end, Frank took Charlie and walked away. Frank was interested in the only young man who loved and cared for him. Frank is interested in the only young man who loves him and is committed to his principles. Charlie, a man whose father died early. He also felt the education of his father in Frank. Their relationship begins to warm up. Frank senses that Charlie seems to be interested in the beautiful women in the restaurant. She takes Charlie to the restaurant. She shows Charlie what flirting skills are. Afterwards, Frank and the beautiful girl a tango dance. It is a famous scene that has contributed to countless movies. Interested in the original film can go see. As they parted, the woman looked at Frank thoughtfully. Frank waved his hand and turned away. The next day Charlie found that Frank was late in waking up, so he went to his bedroom. He found Frank lying in bed in a disheveled state. He looked as if he had been drained of his energy. She told Charlie to take his paycheck and go home. Charlie realized that Frank might be trying to kill himself. He then persuaded Frank to go out and play in various ways. Finally, Frank suggested that he wanted to go for a drive in a Ferrari. The two of them went for a drive with the test-driven Ferrari. In the middle, Frank was not satisfied with Charlie's turtle-crawling speed. He said he wanted to touch the steering wheel. As soon as he got into the driving position, he accelerated like crazy. He also used the act of trying to drift at the fork in the road. Tell Charlie, the fork in the road of life must be straightforward to choose a road. The two racing behavior attracted the police chase. Fortunately, Frank used his acting skills to conceal the fact that she was blind. The ride was over. Frank was in a good mood, and the plan was about to begin. This blind man is crazy. He's barreling into fast-moving traffic, brakes and sirens screeching down the street. Fortunately, the journey was uneventful, but when he got to the side of the street, Frank tripped over a garbage can on the side of the road. Charlie rushed to help Frank up. This always decent man, but the man, who was always a decent man, wanted to go to the bathroom on the side of the street, with Charlie calming him down. Frank finally calmed down. Back at the hotel, Frank had an unprecedented air of twilight about him. He found an excuse to get rid of Charlie. Halfway to the hotel, Charlie realized something was wrong. He turned around and went back. Upon entering, he saw Frank fully dressed. She was about to end her own life. Charlie rushed to find a reason to stop, but by now, Frank was in a frenzy, ready to shoot herself. Charlie was horrified. He rushed over and grabbed the weapon out of Frank's hand. Frank pointed the gun directly at Charlie, said, "Don't make me kill you." Ask him if he knows the desperation of the blind. Now he's not a commanding officer with 1,000 horses. He's not the idol that his family worships. He's just a poor man who's been abandoned by everyone. He's screwed up his life. Frank yells at a loser like me, "Why stay in this world and waste food?" Charlie says, "Shoot me then. You fucked up your life. I fucked up my life too. Let's die together." Frank felt the fear coming from Charlie's body. "You don't want to die." Charlie says, "You don't want to die either."
Give me one reason.
I'll give you two. You can dance a tango and drive a Ferrari better than anyone I've ever seen.
Frank, who found a reason to live, put the gun away. He says Charlie hasn't danced with a pretty girl yet. It would be a shame to die young. The trip to New York ended safely. Charlie returns to school just in time for the school assembly. Fatty and his congressman father sat on the stage. Alone, Charlie is the target of the principal's criticism. That's when Frank walks in. He represented Charlie's father at the assembly. In the face of the principal's anger, Charlie struggled for a moment and then chose not to betray his classmates. The principal announced on the spot that Charlie would be expelled. Before he could say anything, Frank interrupted him.
What is your motto here? Boys, inform on your classmates. Save your hide. Anything short of that, we're gonna burn you at the stake?
Frank accuses the principal of wrongdoing with words of integrity, praise the whistleblower and punish the righteous. The principal slams the hammer in anger. Frank stood up and gave his own speech. At this moment, it was as if Frank was back on the battlefield. He became the iron-blooded general in military attire. He was so strong that he calmed everyone down. No one dared to interrupt him again. Frank said, word by word, you say you're a school for principled leaders, but you're killing people with real principles. You're destroying the spirit of what this school stands for. I don't know if Charlie's silence is right or wrong, but I can tell you this. He would never sell out his friends to get ahead, and that's called politics. It's more like courage. And finally Frank said out loud, that's what a leader should be. And that struck a chord with the school board. They announced that Charlie's disciplinary action would be revoked. Charlie himself would not be held responsible for this. The whole school was in an uproar when the decision was announced. Charlie and Frank got a standing ovation from the crowd, with the crowd cheering. Frank and Charlie walked out of the school auditorium. Charlie knew better than anyone. The education he had received from Frank today, more valuable than he had ever learned in his entire college career. There was a female professor who was very interested in Frank. Charlie assists him with the flirting skills Frank taught him. By the end of the story, Frank returns home. Once again, his little granddaughter runs up and gets naughty. This time Frank doesn't lose his temper. Instead, he was kindly teasing his little granddaughter. Charlie watched this heartwarming scene. He was relieved to leave.